which there are kind of two different dates for it, which is really important. August 2nd and August 4th, 1964 were the alleged attacks on U.S. boats in the Gulf of Tonkin in Vietnam. American ships had been conducting intelligence and infiltration for quite some time in northern Vietnam. And at that point, these ships, the turned to join the Maddox, were actually in Vietnamese territorial waters in the north. So they were inside Vietnam's waters, which means they weren't outside it where they could have monkey knife fights. So no monkey knife fights were going on at that moment. And they got reports that they had been attacked by DRVN, Northern Vietnamese boats. And when LBJ first heard it, he kind of laughed and said, those stupid sailors were probably shooting at flying fish. But very quickly, they pivoted to use this as kind of a reason for war, casus belli. And they claimed that the Vietnamese had attacked. And so just a few days after that, the House of Representatives and the Senate voted overwhelmingly, with only 2 votes against it, Morse and Gruning in the Senate, for the Southeast Asia resolution, otherwise known as the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, which gave the U.S. The power, the authority to take all measures necessary to protect American interest in Southeast Asia. Johnson said it's like grandma's nightshirt, it covers everything. And that would become kind of the legal rationale for the war. Now, a lot of the conspiracy people often cite this and say, it's one of their conspiracies for war. Provoking the other side is and making them responsible for hostilities is not a conspiracy. That's just a strategy in war. And you've seen that with, Lincoln at Appomattox and I'm sorry, Sumter and, remember the Maine and the Lusitania and Sussex in World War I. And so, the U.S. had been conducting these patrols, DeSoto patrols and 34A, Op Plan 34A operations. And they've been doing that for quite some time. Which is conducting, intelligence and recon above the 17th parallel. And so that became the basis in the aftermath of the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. It was an election year, so Johnson's running as a peace candidate, but they did begin air attacks against the North, and that did, kind of created even more impetus for a larger war. So it's important in that regard. And, it's not a conspiracy. It's not a false flag or anything like that. It's what countries do. They provoke other countries and they conduct operations and recon and intelligence. And so the Gulf of Tonkin is really important. What we found out since then, and there have been a lot of studies and a lot of documents released on it, is that clearly, the U.S. did provoke this confrontation, and it, blew it up way out of proportion. And that, especially the second attack on August 4th, I think it was, never really happened. And the first ones are even kind of sketchy. So anyway, it's worth remembering that. And then, of course, something that's actually been in the news a lot lately because of the Oppenheimer movie, which I have not seen yet, so I can't speak about. But August 6th, 1945, obviously, was the date that the United States dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima. We've done a show on that, which we will release, which goes into a lot of detail about the politics and the strategy behind dropping the bomb. Like I said, I haven't seen the movie. I don't know what the basic idea there is, but as we made it clear in our episode on that, which I think was our first YouTube episode ever, actually.
We did it in 2020.
2020, yeah, for the 75th anniversary, right? But, quite clearly, the United States knew that Japan, was in bad shape. They were basically defeated. They had messages, gotten, background messages that the Japanese wanted to surrender. They were ready to get out, but the United States wanted to send a message to the Soviet Union, to the rest of the world, basically establishing, hegemony in the Cold War. They had a nuclear monopoly at the time. They didn't want the Soviet Union to be part of the war against Japan. The United States wanted to defeat the Japanese by themselves, and the Japanese, as John Dower eloquently wrote about, wanted to embrace defeat. They wanted to lose to the United States rather than the Soviet Union, because, as you've seen, the U.S. helped rebuild Japan after World War II. So in the context of the Oppenheimer movie, I know a lot of people are talking about this, but check out our old episode. It's really good. And it really reflects what people who study this think about it. Mm-hmm. Within the U.S., there's still this general idea that, the bomb was dropped to end the war and they had no choice to do it and blah, blah, blah. But if you read the literature, and this is something I've done my whole life because it's kind of the field I'm in, so I've read pretty much everything important about that up to at least 5-10 years ago, at least. But the people who study it overwhelmingly, say no, the bombs, like Gar Alperovitz is the best at that, right? Who have basically pointed out that the military was opposed to the use of the bomb. A lot of main advisors were, but clearly it had much bigger. The atomic scientists were. It had a lot. The context was a lot bigger than that. It was about the Cold War. It's about containing the Soviet Union, having a nuclear monopoly, keeping the Soviet Union out of Japan, and basically sent a message that the United States would have kind of global hegemony and global military power after World War II and going into the Cold War. So the Gulf of Tonkin and the atomic bomb are really important expressions of power, and that's something I think that people on the left really need to think about and talk about a lot more. Just power, the imposition of power, the way you get it, the way you use it, the way you deploy it. It's a valid. We've talked about that with regard to Ukraine, right, quite a bit.
Just a real quick note on Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer was he was an avowed leftist. Both his wife and his mistress were communists. He was involved in anti-Franco causes, anti-fascist causes. He attended communist meetings. The FBI actually had a lot of concerns when the army was trying to recruit him to head the Manhattan Project, and he was convinced to do the Manhattan Project because they told him that they were worried that the Nazis were going to get the bomb first, and they wanted to pull the plug on the project and not drop the bomb once we'd had VE Day in April 1945, and at that point, that's when we feed into what this Cold War period, and Oppenheimer became a dissenter against it himself. And it's really important to note about Oppenheimer. Very very